So if you've been following my channel for a little while now, you'll know that I've made a video about Mount Athos, which explains what the mountain is, what its purpose is, and why it's significant to Orthodox Christians. But I've been lucky enough to visit Mount Athos a couple of times now, and I wanted to do a video that explains what Mount Athos is like firsthand, particularly for a Western Orthodox Christian, as well as to give some advice and tips for those who are looking to visit Mount Athos in the future. So that's what this video is going to be about, is essentially my experiences of the 2 times that I've been to Mount Athos and what my experience was leaving and after I'd been there. Typically when planning a trip, people will start by confirming the dates that you'll be away and then book flights and stay around that. But with Athos, it's not quite that simple. When planning a trip with Athos, you need to confirm with 2 different bodies. First, it's the monasteries that you hope to stay at. The monasteries generally don't have websites or clear ways to contact them, and if they do, it's typically in Greek or Russian. They also have their own unique rules about how many pilgrims they allow at a given time and when they allow them, so it can be really tricky getting in contact with them. The second place to confirm with is the Athos Pilgrims Office, which is the official administrative body that manages and coordinates entry of visitors into Mount Athos. The Pilgrims Office requires that you have confirmation from the monasteries ahead of requesting entry from the Pilgrims Office, and they require that you contact to book them no earlier than 3 months ahead of your visit. This means that for us who are coming from afar, have to book flights, buses, hotels, before we actually get confirmation of permission onto the mountain. The Athos visa, or the Diamonaterion, is a physical copy that can only be received in person. So you only really know 100% if you're getting onto Athos the day that you actually step on the boat. Where you collect your Diamonaterion is at Oronopoli in Halkidiki, Greece, which, if you don't know, Mount Athos is a peninsula. Oronopoli is just a bit further up that peninsula before you get into the sort of Mount Athos borders. It's like the last town before you get into Mount Athos territory. And that's where you would get on the boat to actually go to Mount Athos, which is actually a pretty nice town. It's basically a little tourist spot for everything Orthodoxy. So there's loads of icon shops there. You can buy incense. There's a shop for priests and stuff to buy vestments, decarions and that kind of stuff, and incense holders. And even if you're not going to go to Athos, it's a really cool place to visit, so it's definitely worth checking it out. The first time I went, all credit to my friend Sean, who's the one who essentially arranged the whole thing. So we ended up getting a flight from London, arrived in Thessaloniki. I think we stayed in Thessaloniki for a day, and then we got coached down to Oronopoli, which is a few hours ride. So we stayed there for the night, and then the next morning we woke up at 5 a.m. The Pilgrims Office opens at 6 a.m. I think it technically opens a bit earlier than that, but it says on the board that it opens at 6. And then when you get there, there's typically a huge crowd just lining up ready to collect their Diamonaterions. And it's worth getting there early because you can miss the boat. There's only a few amount of boats, I think. So we ended up lining up at 5 a.m., collected our Diamonaterion about 6 o'clock, and then literally sprinted from that place up onto the ferry boat. And at the time, we didn't actually know what time the thing left. We thought it left at 6. So we thought we were cutting it really short. Thanks be to God, it actually went at 6:30, so we managed to get there. So as I mentioned, the first time I was with my friend Sean, and it was actually quite a stressful situation. A lot of this arrangement was just us shooting in the dark. We had no idea if it was going to work or not. We were praying really hard that God and the Theotokos would let us on this holy mountain, but there's not a lot of confirmation from places. You don't know for sure if things are going to work. The times were a bit all over the place, so we didn't really know what was going on. So the whole time leading up to Athos, there's a lot of uncertainty as to whether we're actually going to get there or not. Once we're on the boat, we did feel a lot better and that we're headed there. But the first thing you notice is that you are literally the only Westerners on the boat. So you definitely feel like an alien and at a place. Sean and I had no idea about the buses or how they worked. This is something that you learn just from going there. The coaches typically work by you just running up to them and it's first come, first serve. When I say coaches, they're like little vans with about 15 seats. So you really have to run to get there first, and again, cash in hand. Another bit of advice if you go to Mount Athos is bring cash with you. Pretty much everywhere at Mount Athos is cash only. For example, coaches, taxis, donations accepted by the monasteries. Most of the shops are cash only. Some of them have card now, but you need cash. If you're gonna go there, definitely get some actual euros out. But Sean and I didn't know this, so we came prepared for anything, and we were just prepared to hike, and that's what we did. So we got there, landed at the port, looked around a bit, thinking what the hell's going on, saw the coaches drive off and thought, okay, well, let's just head off. So we actually hiked from Daphne all the way to Karyes, which is about just over 10-mile hike. And of course, it's a mountain, so you're going up and then back down again. which was pretty intense. I did not have hiking shoes at all. I had running shoes that had no grip on them. And the first point was particularly steep. It was like a zigzaggy step, but you look down and there's a pretty hefty looking drop that if you fall, you're not going to stop rolling and you'll almost certainly die, if not being in big trouble. And I'm pretty sure there's no ambulances or hospitals or anything on Mount Athos. There might be like a local medic or something. So the first part, I was pretty nervous actually. And then not long after climbing, on our way to Karyes, we came across Koutloumousio Monastery. And we got to have a look around there, which was pretty interesting. And then we continued off from there, and it took the vast majority of the day actually. We started walking about 8 a.m. and we arrived in Karyes at some time in the mid-afternoon, I think. And it was an interesting journey. We didn't the normal roads. We actually went the old paths, which people had done traditionally. So which took us through the woods and in some sort of secluded areas, which was really, really cool. But yeah, once we arrived there in Karyes, it felt good to see some civilization. So for those who don't know, Karyes is the capital of Mount Athos. It's the main sort of town where Athos is run and where the government comes together. It's a pretty small town as it goes. I mean, the equivalent size would be kind of like a small village in England or something, but it really is the centre of Mount Athos governance and trade, really. There's a few small shops in there where you can buy normal groceries and things. There's a couple of little restaurants that will sell just sort of fast, friendly food. No meat is sold there. I think you can get fish, but no red meat or animal meat is sold there. And there's actually a very beautiful view from Karyes that you can see the mountain. You're kind of looking up at it. And if you get a clear day, it looks really, really nice. And that's the first place where it kind of hits you that you're in Athos now. The first place we stayed was the Holy Skete of St. Andrew, also known as the Sarai Skete. It's located just outside Karyes and was founded back in the 17th century, which over time grew into one of the largest sketes on Mount Athos. In the 19th century, it really flourished under Russian patronage, and the main church, the Catholicon of St. Andrew, is still one of the largest churches anywhere on Athos. After the Russian Revolution, though, the skete declined quite sharply as monks left and support disappeared. Today, it's slowly being revived by a handful of Greek monks. The architecture is very grand and imposing, but there are very few people actually living and running the place. It's built right along the edge of a mountain slope, and the northern side, where the pilgrims stay, looks out over the woods and down toward the coast. It's calm, spacious, and slightly surreal, especially given its size. So first thing is that we walked to the guest master, which is the person who manages the pilgrims. They were all very friendly. We were greeted with lakumi, which is Greek Turkish delight, and ouzo, which is a Greek alcoholic drink that tastes very much like licorice. They actually gave me a bunch of paper icons, which is cool. We actually spoke to someone from Australia who was there, who's a ethnic Greek, who was born and raised in Australia and then came to Athos again. So yeah, he gifted us these paper icons, which I still have today. And I was given a prayer rope as well, which is still the only prayer rope that I'd ever owned. Just a pretty simple one, but I didn't have one before then. So it's so nice to have a cool story to tell where I got mine. One thing to know about Mount Athos is that it isn't a tourist destination. It's easy to go there with the same mindset as you would when you go on holiday or something, or to a hotel, as if this place is built for you to go there and have a good experience. Mount Athos is not that. It's best to understand it as going into someone else's house. They're there, they're doing their own thing, and this place's purpose is built for those living there, not for those visiting there. And we, when we're visiting, should have the mindset of we're guests in someone else's house. It's good not to expect people to be, super friendly and wanting to chat with you all the time, because they're there for their own reasons, and they're there to actually get away from the world. So don't be surprised if people aren't very quick to chat with you. But despite that, as I say, the monks are still very friendly. It's not uncommon to be welcomed with open arms. That afternoon, we had dinner with the monks, which is a new experience for me. It was the first time I'd had dinner and ate at a monastery, which is pretty unique. You're directed and shown where to sit by one of the monks. You stand before your food, and all of the food is already laid out on the table. It'll be some kind of vegetarian meal laid out for you. They say a prayer, and then you sit down, and then you start eating. There'll be a monk who's reading out the Bible while you're eating, and then once the reading's done, you get up and you walk out. So you've got a set amount of time to eat. It's typically, a reasonable amount of time, actually. I'm someone who eats quite slowly, and I somehow manage to finish. So what typically happens is you hear a bell, the reading stops, and then you get up. The monks and the priests walk out first, and then we follow them going out. I'm not actually sure why that happens, but it's just one of the consistent things that I've noticed. And some people will stay behind and help clear up. It's typically a voluntary thing. whoever decides to stay, but it's good to do that, as you don't have to pay to stay at these monasteries. They ask for a donation, but they don't expect payment. So it's good to help out when and where you can. So we woke up for the service at 3 a.m. and then headed to the church. As we got closer to the church, we could hear the readings. The first hour or so was simply just readings from the gospel. It was all in Greek, so I couldn't really understand anything, but I kind of felt like I didn't need to. The vibe just felt right. I was super tired, and at times I nearly dozed off standing in the Stasidia. But there were no distractions, and everything around me visually, the icons, the crosses, and so on, was really encouraging my mind to focus on Christ and repentance, which is what I'd keep recentering my mind back to. So after a while, I could just feel my soul being recharged by the prayer and God's presence. Orthodox liturgy generally feels like climbing a mountain, a slow, steady movement upward, with the summit being communion. As we moved through the service and closer to that point, the sun began to rise and streaming through the altar window, and then through the altar doors. It felt very mysterious and symbolic, and it was absolutely visually beautiful, as if creation itself was pointing to the presence of Christ in the altar. Receiving communion on Mount Athos is such a privilege. To be there and to offer prayer in that place and to receive God's grace where it feels so concentrated is such a blessing. And then as the sun finally cleared the window, the service came to an end. We received a blessing from the priest, along with blessed bread soaked in wine, and then we headed for breakfast. And once you come out of the service, it finishes about 6 a.m, you go into breakfast. And breakfast is very similar to dinner, where you'd sit down and there's readings. But one of the things I discovered at St. Andrew's St. Anthony's was mountain tea. At the time we went was September, and it was starting to get a bit cold on mountain. We had this absolutely delicious mountain tea, which looked like liquid gold in the cup. And it's this kind of flower that grows on Mount Athos, which when you boil it in water and you can mix a bit of honey in, it has this very nice, rich golden glow. But it tastes really nice, and it might just be the context in which I had it, which is, hungry and tired after a long service, but absolutely delicious. And I ended up buying loads of it from Orinopoly before I went home. So yeah, and then after breakfast, we got cleaned up. We went back to Karyes, got some extra breakfast, some pastries and a bit of coffee. Then we ended up setting off on a walk towards Ivirion, which is a very beautiful walk where you can follow the ancient paths sort of down the mountain and through the woods towards Ivirion. Where there's this ancient stone path, which has got to be at least 800 to 1,000 years old or something. It's got to be as old as the monasteries itself. And it's absolutely enchanting. You feel like you're a hobbit on your way to Mordor. It's great. It's just such an amazing experience walking through these ancient woods. There's all these old little shrines and stuff where you pick a little prayer rope off and put some icons down, which is nice. And then after some time, you come to this big, beautiful fort on the northern coast of the peninsula, which is Ivirion. Ivirion Monastery is one of the oldest monasteries on Mount Athos and one of the most senior as well. I think it's third in the line of authority. It was actually founded in the 10th century by a group of Georgian monks led by St. John the Ivirion. But it actually has a very famous wonder-working icon called the Panagia Portraitisia, or the gatekeeper icon. And the story of this is that the monks saw this pillar of light coming down somewhere in the sea, and St. Gabriel the Ivirion saw it and was deemed worthy to go and collect it. The story is that he walked out onto the water and received the icon. And when it was brought back, it kept moving places. They wanted to put it in church, but it would miraculously move itself by the gate. And the Mother of God communicated to them through the icon that it wanted to actually stay by the gate as the protector to defend them. And there's lots of miracles around the story, particularly around the sort of defense, guarding and protecting the monastery. But the most famous one is during the iconoclasm, someone stabbed the icon in the chin of the Mother of God, and blood poured from the wound, and you can actually still see the little wound with the sort of drop of blood coming out, which is very interesting. But yeah, when we walked into the monastery, I didn't actually know anything about this icon. I knew it had a famous icon, but I had no idea where it was or anything like that. And it's actually kept in this little chapel, which is by the front gate. I was just sort of being nosy and sort of looked in and wandered into this chapel, and I didn't know it was in there, but I just was immediately struck by the presence of this icon. And just had this immediate feeling of sort of spiritual presence, as if the Mother of God was present herself, but immediately knew the weight behind this icon. Ivirion Monastery sits on the coastline, where the mountain drops straight into the sea. From the outside, it looks more like a fortress than a monastery, with thick stone walls facing the water. Once inside, everything is arranged around an inner courtyard, which gives the space a very enclosed and inward-looking feel. Inside the monastery, things are quiet and very peaceful. The pilgrim lodgings at Ivirion were probably the nicest we stayed out in Athos. There were a few cold but working showers, which felt surprisingly luxurious. The rooms had balconies that faced the afternoon sun and looked out over the smaller mountains of the peninsula. At night, when everything went quiet, you could hear wolves or coyotes in the distance. The refectory felt more like a church than a dining hall. The walls were completely covered in paintings of saints from across the Orthodox world. We were served a simple savoury porridge, along with a small cup of red wine grown from the monastery's own vineyards. The service at Ivirion ran from around 3 a.m. and felt darker and more enclosed than the services at the Holy Skete of St. Andrew. There's very little light, and the chanting felt close and contained. And again, receiving communion there was a great blessing, deeply meaningful given where we were and the effort that it took to get there. We were also given the blessing to venerate the relics of many saints, including St. John the Baptist and St. Basil the Great. And then from there we walked straight into the refectory for breakfast. Both times I've been to Mount Athos, I've followed a similar route, starting from the Holy Skete of St. Andrew and St. Anthony, and then moving to Ivirion. Where things differed between the two was on the final stay. The first time we went back to Karyes and then stayed at Koutloumousio Monastery. The monastery is named after its founder, who was originally a Muslim Turk who converted to Christianity. It was founded in the late 13th century and became an important Athonite centre because of its proximity to Karyes and the support it received from Byzantine and Romanian patrons. Over the centuries, it's gone through fires, decline and restoration, but it's remained very much a part of the everyday Athonite life. The service at Koutloumousio ended up being a good example of how being a first-time visitor at Athos, especially as a foreigner, can be a bit of a hit and miss. We didn't realise that during the services, the location sometimes changes. So where the liturgy began, we stayed in the main area with a few readers, wondering what was going on, till everyone else kind of quietly wandered out to the side. We had missed where the main part of the service had moved to, and that was a bit of a theme during the first trip. Not knowing Greek, not having a guide, and just not knowing how things work meant that you missed quite a bit. Buses, parts of services, and small but important details. Even so, I still came away with a deep sense of gratitude. Just being there, participating as best as I could, and receiving communion was a privilege in and of itself. Because of all that, the second trip to Athos felt very different. We knew what we'd missed the first time, and more importantly, we knew what to expect. Simple things suddenly became easier. This time we actually managed to catch the bus to Karyes and skip the hike altogether, which had already changed the pace of things. We also had our priest with us. On Mount Athos, priests are noticed and respected, and the monks naturally make an effort to include them in the centre of what's happening. So by staying close to him, we were able to remain in the heart of the services, instead of hovering on the edges, unsure of what was going on. As I mentioned earlier, we followed the same route for the first two monasteries on the second trip as we did in the first, but the experience felt completely different now that we understood the rhythm of the pace. So the second time from Ivirion, with 5 of us, we ended up getting a coach from Ivirion up to Karyes. And here's another example of how the trip is very much hit and miss, and you need to be quite flexible and opportunistic. We got to Karyes and we kind of just assumed that there's regular buses that go from Karyes to Daphne, but there isn't. There was only one. If we didn't get there at a certain time, we would have missed our ferry boat from Daphne to St. Anne. So we ended up having breakfast in Karyes, and before we realised and started asking around, hey, is there another coach going to Daphne? And we realised that there isn't. So I ended up asking around and just sort of looking around for people, asking about if there's ways to get there. And I found a guy who drove the coach to get us to Karyes, and asked him, and he said, oh yeah, I'm also a taxi driver. So we just paid him like 10 euros each or something. And then he drove us in his car to Daphne, which enabled us to get there on time. And we spent some time in Daphne, got on the boat, and then what we ended up doing is instead of going straight to St. Anne's, we stopped at a monastery called St. Paul's, or Agios Paulos, I think it's called in Greek. And this is a particularly significant monastery for our group because our parish is based in Essex, very close to St. John the Baptist Monastery, founded by St. Sophrony of Essex. St. Sophrony is a local saint to us and quite a significant saint to our community. And this was actually the monastery where St. Sophrony was ordained as a priest. And we didn't actually know that until one of the priests of this monastery took us around, and he was showing us some of the relics that they had, including parts of the 3 gifts given to Christ at his birth, the gold, frankincense and myrrh, which was absolutely insane to be able to venerate that. It was only when our priest was taken into the altar by the priest of St. Paul's and basically told our priest that this is where St. Sophrony of Essex was made a priest, And then we took a hike from St. Paul's, heading east towards the mountain, towards St. Anne's, which is a very beautiful, quite difficult hike actually, very hard, dodgy terrain. Some of us did it in just like church shoes, not realizing that there's going to be a lot of hiking. Another tip would be to bring some proper hiking shoes. And again, this was an absolutely beautiful walk where you can see the whole coast as well as all the beautiful little monasteries dotted along the bottom. It really just feels like you are in medieval Greece or something. A lot of the stuff on Mount Athos has barely changed since that time, all using the same local materials for the architecture and building work. And then after some time of hiking, we ended up coming to the Holy Skete of St. Anna. The Holy Skete of St. Anna is actually one of the oldest sketes on Mount Athos, which began in the 10th century, which originally was just a bunch of scattered sketes on the sort of very steep mountain edge that formed into kind of one unified skete, dedicated to St. Anna, who, for those who don't know, is the grandmother of Christ, the Theotokos' mother. And again, stunning skete. Because of the curvature of the mountain and where you're standing, you can just see the whole thing when you're walking in. It's absolutely beautiful. Again, greeted with Lakumi and Uzo. And this was a really good last spot on our second trip, I think. There wasn't an absolute load of people there. This place was uniquely dark at night. It's probably the clearest night sky I've ever seen in my life. The sky is absolutely stunning. And I think the service this time was a bit later. So 4 a.m. we got up and did the liturgy, which is in a kind of little side chapel. And then after that, we got to go into the main church building and venerate the miraculous, wonder-working icon of St. Anna, which is a great honour and gift to be able to do that. And then from that day, we had our breakfast. And this particular skete was slightly different, where they just bring out big buckets of food and they give it to you that way, as opposed to you sitting down in a hall. That was nice. We all got to eat outside. And then from there, we climbed down the mountain to the dock. And then from there, we got on the boat and sailed off back to Oronopoli. So yeah, the second time on Mount Athos was simply better. There are more of us. We went together with our priest, and having been there before gave us a lot more confidence. Overall, it just felt less chaotic and more settled. Spiritually, it felt like a real recharge. You leave tired, but also renewed. On a practical level, if you're planning a trip to Athos, a few things genuinely help. Bring enough cash, bring a battery pack, leave the church shoes and instead bring some comfortable hiking shoes, and learn at least a little bit of Greek. Even a small amount goes a long way. But the more important advice is less practical and more about mindset. It helps to adjust your expectations in understanding that Athos isn't a holiday. Planning can be uncertain, transport can be a hit and miss, and daily life there involves early mornings, limited food, and a fair bit of walking. At times it can be physically demanding. Seen through the lens of prayer, fasting and struggle though, all of that makes sense. That's really the context that Athos sits in. The pilgrimage there is about stepping away from comfort and allowing space for spiritual renewal. If you approach it with that understanding, you're far more likely to get something lasting out of it. It's also worth saying that Athos isn't something to rush into. It's generally not recommended to go as a catechumen, and it's important to speak with your spiritual father before making the decision. Having guidance and a blessing before going makes a real difference. More than anything, Athos is about refueling the soul. If you keep that as the focus, the rest falls into place. So yeah, that's my experience of Mount Athos. But yeah, I hope you found this video interesting or helpful. If you've been to Mount Athos yourself and have your own experience, let me know in the comments. I want to hear about it. So yeah, thanks for watching. Please like and share this video. I'll see you in the next one.